What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. It's been a long road getting from there to here, and it's been a long time, but finally Ash Ketchum is to be retired as the main protagonist of the Pokémon series, as well as Pikachu, presumably, but mascots are a whole separate conversation. Today, instead of Ash himself, I wanted to look back at the many traveling companions across the years and see which one of them could be the very best like no one ever was. We already know that Ash is champion material, but which one of them could also come out on top? But this will only be going off the main anime canon, so Misty will not be getting her Quagsire from the Johto games. So just starting at the bottom, I think we can all agree that Tracy does not have what it takes. He only ever had 3 Pokemon that we know about, that being Marill, Venonat, and Scyther, so he's already doubling up on type weaknesses. Although, he did unwittingly catch a huge power fairy type before it was cool, so that could be something, I guess. But let's just be charitable. Time has passed since Ash traveled with these people, so let's see what happens when we pimp out their teams to the max. Well, for Tracy, it's not all that much. He can get an Azumarill and a Venomoth, which are fairly useful, and then a potential Scizor. But then again, Tracy's Scyther did have a whole arc about how old it was, so maybe it evolves into Kleavor instead. Either way, as good as some of these Pokemon can be, a team of 3 isn't going to be able to stand up against the full loadout that some of the others will have. Like Misty, for instance. She's had far more than the 6 Pokemon limit over the years, so we get to have our pick. No, Misty is held back by different reasons, largely that being her monotyped status. I know that she's a water-type gym leader, but that didn't stop some of Ash's other friends from branching out, and it's so common that many others have water-type Pokemon as well. But what can we pull? Well, Misty of course has her signature Starmie on her side, she also has a Gyarados, a Politoed, and a Corsola, and she has a Horsey that could evolve all the way into a Kingdra. Now, here's where things get interesting, because going off of the anime, she also famously had a Togepi that one day evolved and she let it go. In the games, releasing a Pokemon is permanent, but in the show, they could always find a way back if they really wanted to, so I'm gonna say that it's not impossible for Misty to have a Togekiss as well. Now that does help a bit, but it still leaves her whole team very weak to Electric, so Pikachu alone could do her in. And then if you combine the previous 2 limitations of small teams and universal weaknesses, you get the Alolan group of friends, since these trainers have too few Pokemon and are too restricted on types. Take Kiawe. He's got a great showing of Charizard, Turtonator, and Alolan Marowak. These are all pretty strong Pokemon, but they're also all fire types, so if he's facing one bulky rock type on the opposing team, they'd cut him in half. Same for Sophocles, only ever catching a Togedemaru and a Vikavolt, and then borrowing an Ampharos. He could have captured a whole slew of electric types since then, but we had no confirmation of that, so that's all we can work with. The ladies are not much better, Lana only having caught a Primarina, a Lapras at one point, and an Eevee, and she'll probably just evolve that into a Vaporeon. Even if she doesn't, if she makes it cover her team's weaknesses, that's not gonna let her survive in a Nuzlocke. Mallow is much the same with her bare bones Tsarina, although arguably she could have more going on, but we'll come back to that later. And then Lily has her Alolan Vulpix, but even if she was able to evolve it at some point, she's not gonna be able to solo that for very long. Another far cry comes from Silent, since this chef extraordinaire only ever caught his signature Pansage, and then a Crustle, a Stunfisk, and at one point a Basculin. So even if he used a Leaf Stone and evolved his partner, that's still a pretty soft team, with no real universal threats, but still overlapping weaknesses. However, things do improve with the other Univa candidate, Iris, since she branched out a bit more, having a fully evolved Haxorus and Dragonite, but despite being a Dragon Tamer, she still had an Excadrill and an Emolga, so that is a decent amount of coverage. But then the only other Pokemon that we know she caught was a Gible. So even if we evolve it up to Garchomp, that does help, sure, but it also doesn't really bring a lot of type diversity, maintaining the heavy ice weaknesses. So she has gotten the closest of anyone so far, but it's not quite enough to be the strongest. It gets cut back even more with her replacement, Serena, since she only has a Delphox, a Sylveon, and a Pancham. Now, she could have conceivably evolved that Pancham, however, that would require a Dark type to be on her team. But if she did catch an unspecified Dark type, Why would she not use that on her all-out team? So, since we are not able to know if she ever caught that Mega Absol like she has in the games, this is a rare instance where we cannot fully evolve her team. Clement, however, puts up more of a fight. Right off the bat, he's got a Luxray and a Diggersby who are very strong, but he's also got a Dedenne and a Chespin. Now, he can evolve that Chespin to its final stage easily enough, but luckily he also has his gym Pokemon to call on, Magneton and Heliolisk. Granted, these are more electric types, tilting the team to be more similar, but it's still better than not having a full team of Pokemon at all, so given the right strategy, he could do some serious damage with these Pokemon. So that just leaves us with the cream of the crop, starting with Brock. Obviously, he's got a Steelix that was evolved after he let his brother take care of Onix. He's also got a Crobat that evolved from the Zubat that he had for so long. On top of those, he's also got a Forretress and a Blissey as possible tanks, and great coverage Pokemon with both Ludicolo and Krogunk. Now, we've never seen Krogunk evolve, and I think that it could still be fairly strong without it, but a Toxicroak wouldn't hurt either. So that is a solid team with even good backups waiting in the wings, like Golem, Marshtomp, or Sudowoodo. So Brock is a real contender here. So then I would say about on equal footing with him would be both May and Dawn. May has her trusty Blaziken as a powerhouse, as well as a Venusaur and a Wartortle who can easily evolve into Blastoise, so that gives her a solid starter trio going. Not to mention the additions of Glaceon and Snorlax, since we can all assume that her Munchlax will evolve at some point, and then she also has a Beautifly and a Skitty. So even though Beautifly isn't the strongest Pokemon out there, it does provide nice type variations that a Delcatty wouldn't. That's a pretty nice team. But Dawn has a good setup too, given that she already has a Mamoswine and a Togekiss to help out, as well as Pachirisu to provide decent support. However, Dawn's most prominent partners, Piplup and Baneri, are not evolved. If we were to evolve them fully into Empoleon and Lopunny, and for good measure let's evolve her Quilava into a Typhlosion, then Dawn would make a formidable rival with that kind of team. However, I think we can agree that Dawn seems less likely to evolve some of her lower stage friends, be it for contest or character reasons, which does place May slightly above her since more of her Pokemon are already confirmed to be evolved. But with all that, there is of course one more of Ash's friends that we need to look at, this of course being the most recent one, Go from Pokemon Journeys. Go is very different from most of the traveling companions that we've seen, since he actually seems to follow the catch-em-all mindset, catching vast quantities of Pokemon all the time. So there is no shortage of fodder for us to use, starting with his closest friend Cinderace, which would undoubtedly be the cornerstone of any team that he builds. And likewise, he's got an Inteleon to back it up. Now, he also completed the trio, but his Grookey was not seen to evolve. We could do it ourselves, but we don't have to. We can just pick another one of his many Pokemon like a Ferrothorn to fill that role instead. Then we can round out the rest of his team with the full-blown Golurk that he caught, his Alola Ninetales, and a hardy Heracross. That's a difficult team to overcome, but we also have to mention the fact that Go has canonically caught legendary Pokemon. In his many travels, he's at least caught a Suicune, which I would sure use instead of Inteleon if I had one available, I don't know about you, but he also caught a Regieleki and Eternatus. That certainly stacks his team even more than it already was, but that is not the extent of the legendary exploits, since as we alluded to before, Mallow at one point cared for a Shaman, and Lily also bonded with Magearna and a Blacephalon, or Lana with her Xurkitree. So that bolsters their abilities quite a bit, but not quite enough for them to come out on top in an all-out brawl. I mean, even Ash's friend Bonnie had a Zygarde on her side. But speaking of, if we're talking about befriending Pokemon, there is one character that cannot be overlooked, that of course being Max. Max was a tag-along during the Hoenn era of the show, and he was too young to actually be a Pokemon trainer. But in time, he will be, and once he goes down that path, his past could catch up with him, meaning that he could possibly have a Jirachi on his team. There was a whole movie about how great friends they were. So if anyone was to get a mythical, I think Max would clinch it for sure. And if not that, then he also befriended a Deoxys at one point, and other prominent friendships allow him to possibly have a Mightyena, a Breloom, a Banette, and a Gardevoir or Gallade, possibly being able to Mega Evolve any one of those last three, so that's a pretty strong full team. And that is only counting the canon experiences that we have seen him have thus far. Once he actually becomes a trainer, he'll presumably get a starter from Professor Birch that would help, and likely even inherit a Pokemon from his dad Norman and get to train up a Slackoth to evolve at some point. Sure, that's all speculation, but what is not is his almost encyclopedic memory regarding all things Pokemon. Being able to rattle off not just type effectiveness like any old rube, but level up movesets and even mechanics, like Earthquake doing double damage to a digging opponent. I know that there's more to Pokemon battling than just memorization, but it sure seems to serve the real-world champions fairly well. Maybe Max doesn't have the gut instinct that it takes to become a champion, but what else would he have learned in his time with Ash if not to sometimes go on impulse? I feel like a few losses would whip him into shape and cause him to try some crazy new strategies. I mean, he was present for the infamous Thunder Armor event versus Liza and Tate, so Max could definitely think outside the box when need be. Now, by the time he does grow into that trainer, Go will also have had time to travel more and possibly catch even more legendaries. But if that's true, then we could speculate that about any one of these people. Just looking at the Pokemon that we can for sure connect back to these trainers, Go's most prominent option, Eternatus, ends up being weak to all three of Max's potential heavy hitters. Granted, Go has more where that came from, but what's Suicune gonna do against Jirachi? Perhaps it is presumptuous to think that Max would get all of these Pokemon to join him once he becomes a trainer. After all, in the lore of the movie, Jirachi would still be sleeping for another few thousand years, but if that's the way this kid operated before, why wouldn't he keep gaining the trust and adoration of Pokemon all over in his journeys? We've seen plenty of Ash's friends over the years not care about this sort of thing. Silent never caught a full team because he never forged any relationships important enough. But Max's personal investment in the individual Pokemon, combined with his immense knowledge of the ins and outs of battle, along with his potential starting team, makes me inclined to say that Max would indeed be one of the most dominant trainers that we have seen across the history of the show. Believe me, I didn't expect this either. But if Ash can be an up-and-coming kid that wins champion tournaments, then in a few years' time, I could totally see Max getting reunited with his old friend only to end up beating him. And honestly, this is kind of the redemption arc that Max needs, so we don't all think of him as such an annoying little brat. But maybe you don't agree, so which of Ash's companions do you think could be the very best when looking at the canon of the anime? Let me know down in the comments. Also, be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.